Amanda Fielding is the founder and director of the Beckley Foundation and is widely recognized as one of the driving forces behind the current renaissance of psychedelic research. By establishing key research collaborations with some of the world's most prestigious universities, she's propelled the field forward over the last 20 years, conducting several landmark studies, such as the world's first LSD brain imaging study carried out as part of the Beckley Imperial Research Program. Since establishing the foundation in 1998, she set about assembling an international network of scientists, politicians, and drug experts in order to build a scientific evidence base upon which to reform global drug policies. Advocating the establishment of legally regulated drugs markets, she has performed an advisory role for several governments and produced a number of highly influential drug policy reports. She has also co-authored over 50 scientific papers.
Psychedelics are wondrous, non-specific medicines of the future. They can not only treat a wide range of mental and physical disorders, but they can also facilitate transformation and inspiration, which can leave an indelible mark. What amazing compounds! The food of the gods indeed. They interact with the human brain in a way that fundamentally alters our mood and our abilities. Research is beginning to show how successfully they can treat a wide range of conditions, including depression, anxiety, addiction, PTSD, and OCD, among others. There's also a growing body of clinical evidence supporting their potential to treat physical disorders as well. Our work is finally coming out of the shadows and gaining widespread recognition, which hopefully in time will make research easier and, most importantly, contribute to changing the scheduling of these compounds, cannabis, MDMA, and the psychedelics, so that doctors will be able to prescribe them and clinics to provide them. Using low doses of psychedelics, microdosing, to enhance well-being and creativity has become very popular of late, and may indeed be the way we break down barriers and make the psychedelic experience more accessible to people at large. I have long been interested in the experience of taking regular doses of LSD, as this was an experience I learned the value of back in the 60s. I was introduced to LSD in 1965 and was extremely lucky to meet and partner with a scientist of exceptional insight the following year, Bart Huggers. He had recently developed two game-changing hypotheses, one about the changes in cerebral circulation underlying changes in consciousness, the other a mechanistic description of the ego. I found these explanations life-changing as they enabled me to live and work on LSD, and in my opinion to see much further and deeper than I would have been able to without them, and to be more creative and productive. I tested this hypothesis on the Go board and found I won more games if I was on LSD and my opponent was not. Using myself as my laboratory, I studied physiology, psychology, and philosophy, and over the next 30 years did everything I could to find doctors and scientists interested in exploring these topics, and media personalities who would like to disseminate them to the wider world. In those days, apart from occasions of peak experience, my aim was to use the dose that hit that sweet spot where vitality and creativity are enhanced while leaving me in full control of my behavior. I grew to love this state. It was comparable to what people are doing now with the microdosing. However, in those days, the majority of people were not on board with our vision of regular psychedelic use to enhance cognitive functioning. The message was more akin to Alan Watts, who said, "When you get the message, hang up the phone." We, on the contrary, saw psychedelics as psychovitamins, or as tools to enhance creativity and productivity. It is only now that people are coming round to this viewpoint. I realized then that the only way forward through the ever-thickening fog of prohibition was with the very best science, and over the years I approached many scientists and doctors. However, common sense and dedication was no competitor to the taboo. which nearly always had the last laugh. It was like snakes and ladders. This continued for the better part of 30 years. It was a very exciting period, but I was amazed and saddened at the lack of substantial progress. At the beginning of the 90s, brain imaging technology began to emerge. I decided that I'd better become a foundation in order to get access to this new technology, and with it to explore the brain using the psychedelics as tools to alter consciousness, so that one could compare the normal state of consciousness with the enhanced one. To do this, in 1998, I founded the Beckley Foundation, which has been pioneering cutting-edge research into psychedelics ever since. I invited some top scientists to be on my advisory board, starting with Albert Hoffman. Through the Beckley Foundation, I established collaborations with leading scientists around the world. One such collaboration was with Dave Nutt, who, in 2005, I persuaded to join me in the scientific investigation of psychedelics. This collaboration evolved into the Beckley Imperial Research Program, which has carried out some breakthrough research. Since then, most of the research carried out by the Beckley Foundation and other laboratories around the world has been focused on 1 or 2 moderate to high doses of psychedelics, which can generate a peak or mystical experience in which the most profound shifts in experience seem to occur. This state is characterized by a sense of unity with all things, ego dissolution, transcendence of time and space, a sense of insight into the ultimate nature of reality, feelings of ineffability and awe, profound positive emotions such as joy, connectivity, and love. The peak experience is today being increasingly validated as a key component of psychedelic therapy. However, I believe the microdose, or maybe I should say the lower dose, that can be taken more regularly, should also have its place in psychedelic therapy and as a smart drug to improve well-being, mood, and cognitive functioning. The microdose experience has an entirely different set of characteristics. It improves mood and vitality, enhances focus, boosts creativity, increases motivation and drive, all importantly while leaving the user in the driving seat. Only recently has the world at large, led by Silicon Valley and its desire to improve cognitive functioning, woken up to the possibility of microdosing. But there has been no laboratory research conducted on it so far. This is why I'm currently preparing several microdosing studies at the Beckley Foundation. The first, as part of the Beckley Imperial Program, will use brain imaging technology to investigate what is going on in the brain with very low doses of LSD. Technology has given us untold wealth in many areas, but has not brought us happiness. We are currently in the midst of a global epidemic of mental illness. Can the careful use of psychedelics offer a new approach to psychiatry? In the UK, 1 in 3 teenage girls suffers from an anxiety or depressive disorder. The number of teenage suicides has hit its highest rate, with more than 4 teenage suicides each week. It looks as though the epidemic is set to grow. In the US, rates are similar. According to the WHO, depression and anxiety are the leading causes of disability worldwide. And once depression or anxiety sets in, psychiatry has limited tools to deal with it. Up to 30% of patients are unresponsive to antidepressant treatment, and 15% of people with treatment-resistant depression commit suicide. Instead of uncovering the underlying causes of depression and anxiety, modern medicine prescribes medication that suppresses the symptoms rather than curing them, and which create their own problems. However, psychedelics, which exhibited so much promise during the 50s and 60s for psychological disorders, appears to reduce the symptoms of many mental health disorders, and remarkably, the results are sustained for long periods afterwards. Psychedelics, unlike conventional psychiatric medicines, produce their effect with just 1 or 2 doses, which could be maintained with an occasional booster when necessary if psychedelics were to become regulated medicines. The Beckley Imperial Research Program carried out the first study to investigate the efficacy of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, the results of which were published last year in The Lancet. 67% of participants were depression-free after 1 week, and 42 remained in remission 3 months later. Our recent research has shown that this improvement is sustained for 6 months. We showed how higher ratings of feelings of unity, spiritual experience, blissful state, and insightfulness all correlated with higher reductions in depressive symptoms. A study investigating psilocybin for nicotine cessation carried out at Johns Hopkins has also shown that the greater the mystical type experience, the greater the benefits. In this study, participants received 2 doses of psilocybin with an optional third. At 6 months, 80% were smoking abstinent and 67% at 12 months. A remarkable 86.7% of participants rated their psilocybin experiences among the 5 most personally meaningful and spiritually significant experiences in their lives. Higher mystical type experience scores correlated with a greater reduction in craving from baseline to the 6-month follow-up. The Johns Hopkins and NYU studies looking at psilocybin as the treatment for anxiety created by their diagnosis of terminal illness found that the greater the mystical experience, the greater the reductions in depression and anxiety among participants. The peak experience appears to reboot the brain, breaking fixed patterns of thought and behavior, increasing neuroplasticity, and enabling one to transform maladaptive patterns of behavior and thought, such as those underlying depression, addiction, OCD, and PTSD. For those struggling with depression and anxiety, the experience may enhance their sense of self-worth and personal interconnectedness, decreasing feelings of alienation and estrangement. For the cancer patient facing death, the mystical experience can help the patient to overcome their fear of dying and to find a sense of peace with their fate. Brain imaging can help us to understand the neural underpinnings of these experiences and to explain why they may be providing such relief in a wide variety of conditions. Our psychedelic research at the Beckley Imperial Research Program has focused on the disruption of the default mode network, a high-level cortical network which underlies the autobiographical sense of self and in many ways represents a seat of the ego, and also acts as the doorkeeper of consciousness. It has been observed that the 2 main hub centers of the default mode network, the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, are hyperactive in sufferers from depression and addiction. It is as if negative ruminations have got fixated. The feeling of ego dissolution features in participants' reports of their experiences, and correspondingly we have seen the default mode network disintegrate and become much less ordered and cohesive, with a reduction of its blood supply. Simultaneously, we have seen increased communication between the individual hubs within the default mode network and other networks in the brain. However, I don't think the DMN is the only network we should be looking at. The self isn't a unitary phenomenon. There are many different selves jostling within our brain, and many different ways to characterize the experience of selfhood. Here, I would like to briefly look at three primary senses of self, which I will call the ego, executive, and core self. One compared these three selves to Freud's ego, superego, and id. The ego, or the autobiographical self, is the one that became most familiar to psychedelic researchers. It's our sense of ourselves as an identity that ties together our memories of who we are and our understanding of who we'll be in the future, and thus our ability to plan ahead in the long term. The default mode network supports this sense of self. Our executive self is our rational decision maker. This self is supported by the central executive network, a number of high-level cortical regions which can summon information and hold it in working memory, direct attention and maintain focus on one task, weigh up an issue and make a decision, and initiate actions. Finally, we have a more fundamental or intuitive sense of self, a self that is concerned with our present moment awareness. This sense of selfhood is represented within the insula, a region that sits between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and seems to bridge the gap between the emotional, instinct-driven limbic system and the rational neocortex. The insula is implicated in a wide range of conditions and behaviors, from orgasm to cigarette craving and maternal love, to decision-making and sudden insight, and probably consciousness itself. The insula is a key node of the salience network, another high-level network that has significant control of the brain. Its other main mode, the anterior cingulate cortex, is involved with analyzing information from all over the brain to work out what is most important, and then drawing focus to it, making it salient, in other words. It draws heavily on our emotional center to make these judgments and is involved in our sense of intuition. These three networks, the default mode network, the central executive network, and the salience network, all exert control over the mind. Often they work in tandem. At other times they seem to compete. The sensation of being torn in different directions while making a decision, for example, may be the result of these different networks coming to different conclusions about the best course of action. Psychedelics, we have discovered, cause a disruption of normal network functioning. Networks disintegrate, meaning that the hub regions within a network stop communicating as closely. Networks also desegregate, meaning that their regions start communicating more closely with other regions outside the network. We've conducted considerable research investigating how this affects the default mode network, but of course it could equally apply to the other networks too. This could explain both the mystical and the microdosing experiences. Under the influence of psychedelics, the self-representing networks desegregate and communicate with other networks much more. Our representation of ourself becomes more fluid and chaotic. With the high or medium dose, other networks, such as the salience network, may increase its influence on the experience by increasing the salience of usually unimportant things. Take, for example, Aldous Huxley's description of flowers during his first trip. Quote, "I was not looking now at an unusual flower arrangement. I was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation, the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence. Reduction in the default mode network, cohesion, could also be important for microdosing, giving rise to the flow state, where you lose yourself in the task you are performing, becoming one with the flow. A recent study has shown that increased communication between the default mode network and the central executive network leads to enhanced creativity. Mild desegregation in network function, as brought about by the microdose, could allow more novel problem-solving pathways to open up, involving more communication between brain networks which do not normally communicate with each other, leading to enhanced insight and intuition. I'm hoping to explore this in our microdosing study, where I have proposed that we use the ancient game of Go as the task to investigate creativity and intuitive pattern recognition. Aspects of the mystical experience could also be explained by profound disruption of the salience network, ego dissolution or non-duality resulting from the failure to differentiate between self and the outside world, divinity, the sense of communicating with a greater entity due to misrepresenting one's own thoughts as coming from outside, transcendence, the sense that everything has some ultimate significance or meaning caused by everything gaining increased salience. The peak experience has clinical value through enhancing neural plasticity. This has been reported in several studies. In the same way that a blacksmith heats up metal to make it more malleable, psychedelics could increase the excitability of the brain to make it more plastic. The salience network helps us adapt our behavior. When we make a mistake or a failed prediction, the salience network draws our attention to the issues and increases the plasticity of relevant brain areas so we can learn from our mistakes and adapt. The greater the mistake, the higher the salience and the greater the plasticity. The mystical experience could be an extreme example of this state. We experience the highest level of significance and are able to change in the most profound ways. The mystical experience can also happen endogenously, without drugs, usually during moments of extreme stress or in a near-death experiences. These highly stressful or life-threatening situations can trigger dramatic shifts in behavior in the ultimate effort to survive. Psychedelic drugs can trigger this same deep learning mechanism, but in a way that we can accurately harness, leading to extraordinary therapeutic opportunities. Psychedelics can induce a state of high plasticity, enabling profound shifts in thought and behavior to be achieved rapidly. The mystical aspect of this learning experience isn't just incidental, but fundamental to its value. To conclude, our research is beginning to shed light on the psychedelic peak experience and how it can be so valuable in therapy. Much less is known about the microdosing experience, but I hope in the next few years this will change dramatically and that we will have a better understanding of how microdosing can benefit mental health and society. In fact, microdosing might prove to be a more palatable way to open the doors to psychedelic therapy. The past few years have been the most productive ever in terms of quality research into psychedelic medicine, and the trend only looks set to increase in the next few years. It is an exciting time. I'm looking forward to finally getting answers to questions I first asked 50 years ago, hopefully enabling these wondrous medicines to reach those in the greatest need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I think endogenously we can get to the same experience as the psychedelic experience, but it's more random and harder to reach. So psychedelics give us a way of, let's say, artificially reaching that plastic state, which is so valuable to overcome fixed patterns of behavior. So I think it makes psychedelics an incredible tool for psychotherapy. But, the picture I used was Saint Teresa of Avila. What she said was exactly what you hear from someone on a very high psychedelic trip. I forget what it was, I read it years ago, but I thought, well, she could have been on acid, or I'm sure she wasn't, but... I think, what suits the individual. I think they both have value, but maybe some people like one and some people like the other. I like that point where one was thinking at a more vital, exciting area, but one was still kind of vaguely in control of what one was doing, which was probably a medium dose more than a microdose, but I'm very interested in researching it. I think it's rather like in the 60s, they said LSD caused genetic malformation. It's a frightening thing to put out, that it upsets your heart valve. I think there's been no evidence of it, but I think we'll have to do very expensive and extended studies to see whether it does have effect or not. Because obviously it's an important element for continual LSD or psychedelic taking. That's really why I would say I was microdosing in the old days, because I was having a standard dose, but it became a normal dose because one got tolerant to it. And it's a very nice state, so long as it hasn't hit my heart. But with microdosing, I think it's such a low dose. I mean, Jim Fadiman talks about 10 micrograms or even 5. Well, I'm sure you have to take thousands to have any effect on your heart valves. So I don't know. I think everyone's different. I think some people are very sensitive at 10 micrograms, find it a bit high and difficult to balance. I think it's for the person to find the individual's sweet spot, as I put it, which is comfortable and positive. But that book, A Really Good Day, I think she puts very well the benefits she got from microdosing.
Now, she talks a little bit about having a rosy glow and feeling some effects. Is that still microdosing if you're feeling effects, or must it be sub-noticeable?
I think you can call a microdose what you like, kind of thing. I think it's a very good marriage. I always want to get in with people who are really good with computers. I can't use them. To test for cognitive enhancement. In fact, I'm very much wanting to get Sergey Brin involved in my microdosing study, looking at Go, because it was a Google AI machine which beat the champion player. And I do actually think Go is a very good test of intuitive pattern recognition, which is the kind of the basis of creativity, seeing the relationship of things. And in my mind, after many thousands of Go games, which I took really seriously in those days, I know I played a better game when I was on LSD. And because my opponent's handicap went up. So you could test how many games you won. And so I think it's very interesting I think it's a very great value of a psychedelic that it can increase cognitive functioning and creativity. And you can't hang a research proposal on it because it's not a disease, which is a pity. But I think in time it'd be interesting to see if it enhances creativity and problem solving. When he was 102, I asked him if he took it, and he said, no, he didn't, but he gave it to his mother.